In this video, we'll explore JavaScript objects, the fundamental building blocks for organizing data in JavaScript. You'll learn how to create objects, access and modify their properties, and work with JSON. JavaScript objects are collections of key-value pairs. Each key-value pair is called a property. If you're coming from Python, think of them like dictionaries. In Java, they're similar to hash maps. Let's look at an example. So here we create a simple object with two properties, name and age. Notice that if I run this and look at the type of user, it's going to print out the type of object. And of course, the object is also printed out on line 3. Let's break down the syntax. Key must be a string or symbols, but you can omit the quotes when the key is a valid identifier. Values can be any type, primitives, other objects, even functions. So let's look at a new example. Notice that how the name contains another object, and see job title, since it has a space, we need to wrap it up in double quotation. Also note that you can add a trailing comma at the end, and that's okay. It's not a problem. All right, let's see now how we can access properties. There are two ways to access object properties. One is dot notation, another one is using the bracket notation similar to arrays. Let's take a look at this example. So I declare the user object, and then I get their name using the dot notation, and I get their age using the bracket notation. So the dot notation is cleaner, especially where your key is a valid identifier. Bracket notation is particularly useful when your key has spaces in it. It's not a valid identifier. Like in here, for example, if you want to get job title out of user, you have to do it this way. You would have to say job title, and then if you run it, it will I'm gonna make sure that I correctly spell it. There you go. So when you run it, it'll give you the job title. So a lot more common to use the dot notation. Let's look at how you can modify the properties now. So somewhat similar to how you access them, you can also go ahead and modify them. For example, I have the user object again with the name and age, and notice here that I use the bracket notation to modify the name. I use the dot notation to modify the age. Now this is interesting. I can even add a new property that did not exist in the object to begin with. I just added the last name. And if you print out this object, now that last name is also included. Now you can, as you see here, you can add new properties. You can also delete existing properties. So if you want to delete properties, you can use the delete keyword to do that. So take a look at an example here. It's again the user object, and I want to delete their age. If I go and say delete user.age, now this property is gone. If you try to access it, it's going to give you undefined. And if you just print the user object out, you're going to see that the age property does not exist in there. So let's look at another useful feature of objects, and this has to do with computed properties. So sometimes you need to create properties with dynamic keys, and the square brackets in object literals let you compute the property name. So look at this example. I've got key, which is age. I've got value, which is 21. And then I define user1, and I use this syntax, right? So square brackets, and I put the key in there, and then colon the value. If you print this out, it's going to come out as, age 21. So it took the value of the key and used it as the key, and it took the value of this variable and used it as the value. Now here's another interesting shorthand that is helpful. Like let's say I have a user named John, and I want to pass the variable age here. If I directly pass it here, it will use the variable identifier as the key and the value of it as the value associated with that key. So as you can see how this is printed out, name is John and age is 21. Let's look at another thing which is helpful when you work with objects in JavaScript, and this is destructuring them. So look at this example. You may have an object that has a lot of properties, and what you can do is extract multiple properties into variables at once. This is the syntax for it. So you say something like let or const, and you use curly brackets, and then you list out the properties that you want to extract from this object. And so if I print this out, you can see that I've extracted the name and the age. So let's take a look at how you can destruct and also rename a variable. Here's an example of it. So I have first name, last name, age, and I decided to extract first name and rename that to F name. And I have age, and I also have this special syntax, the 3.rest syntax that you see over here. So what happens there is that all the other attributes in the user object will go into this rest variable. So let's run it and see how it works. This is especially useful when you only need like certain properties and want to pass the rest along to like another function or another part of the process. Now, the last thing I want to show you here in this video is what is called JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's a text-based version of JavaScript objects. And so it has some restrictions. It's a bit more restrictive than how objects in JavaScript works. For example, you must put the keys in double quotes. You can use anything for values. There must be numbers, strings, Boolean, null, arrays, or objects. But they are very commonly used, especially when you build a server-side application or web application. It's very common these days to pass along information between different services, between different software applications using this format. It's fairly human readable, and well, at the end of the day, it's just text. So it sort of became very popular. Started with web developers, but it sort of caught on with other software developers as well. So let's take a look at an example of this. JavaScript, in fact, these days it has an object built into it called JSON, all caps, and it comes with some helper properties that helps you to basically convert a regular JavaScript object into JSON or parse it back into a regular object. So here you see that I'm doing JSON.stringify, and I pass the user object to it, and then I get that and I parse it back and store it in the parsed variable. So let's take a look at how that looks like. You can see that when it is parsed, when it is stringified, this adheres to the specs of JSON. So for example, all the keys are strings and in double quotation. And when it is parsed back, it is a regular JavaScript object that I can like use dot product and get a particular property out of it and print it out. All right, we've covered JavaScript objects, and there's more to cover here, but this is a good start for us. It sort of gives us the basic that we can work with JavaScript objects. We've seen how to create them with literal syntax, how to access and modify properties with dot and bracket notation. You've seen example of destructing it to extract values and converting between objects and JSONs. Objects are everywhere in JavaScript. In fact, it is often said that everything in JavaScript is object. And so being able to work with it is an important fundamental skill that will serve you well.